All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is actually going to be the first part of our FAFSA series. In today's webinar, we're going to be highlighting different states that have implemented and adopted a universal FAFSA policy. So we have a packed agenda today, so we'll make this very brief. My name is Deborah Martin, and I'm FCAN's policy analyst, and I'll be your host for today. So pleased to welcome today's presenters. We have representatives from Louisiana, Alabama, and Indiana as we hear about each state's journey on advocating, adopting, and implementing a universal FAFSA policy. Of course, many on the call might know that Florida has not yet adopted such a policy. And so as a result, our high school graduating class every year misses out on over $300 million in Pell Grants. And so we all know that the FAFSA is such an integral part to make sure that students are unlocking dollars to attend a variety of post-secondary institutions, including technical colleges. And so we really wanted to have this webinar to highlight examples from other states that have successfully adopted this policy and have seen some of the improvements that this has really done for some of their students that have graduated high school and are looking to further their education. And so before we get started with today's presentation, I just want to remind everyone of a couple items. Of course, please, this is interactive, so we welcome your questions. This is all about learning together. And so we have our Q&A box in the dashboard that you can use to put questions in for our panelists at any time during the webinar. And we will have time at the end to address them. And second, please feel free to learn what you're learning. Please feel free to share what you're learning on your favorite social media site. We love to hear what's resonating with you and what's really capturing your attention from today's webinar. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and all materials will be available within a week of the recording. And that's going to include the slides that we'll be showing in today's presentation as well. All right. So I will turn it over to our first panelist today. We have Barry Bailey, Education Program Consultant at the Office of Career and College Readiness in Louisiana's Department of Education. And then Ebony Holmes, who is the Director of Public Information and Advising in Louisiana's Office of Student Financial Aid Assistance. And I will turn it over to you, Ollie. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you.
Of course.
Good afternoon, guys. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Barry Bailey, and I do work for the Louisiana Department of Education as an education program consultant. And we're going to, I handle all things FAFSA for the state of Louisiana through the Department of Ed. So I'm typically a person that's generally on the road, helping students and families complete this application, doing various things with this to make sure that we do help our students and families complete it and complete it correctly. So how we came about with doing universal FAFSA in our state was we kind of, just like you mentioned earlier, we started looking at a lot of things that was our students were leaving funds on the table. We were looking at that a lot of our students, they were having the desire to go to college, but that next step, they weren't sure. Of course, they were completing admissions applications, but then they didn't know exactly what their next step was. And we were finding that it's easy to do an admissions app, but that FAFSA application was where a lot of our students were just kind of stopping and didn't know what that next step was. So we kind of came up with deciding to say, hey, that we can help you figure out what the next step is. So the first thing we kind of did was, if you advance to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. And I did introduce myself. In our division, we handle all different types of things. Like I said, I do all things FAFSA here. If you can advance to the next one for me, please. And so the first thing we decided to do was come up with a financial aid working group. And that is, we looked at everyone in our state that actually would have a stake in this. And so to provide more access for our students in the state in 2014, we did come up with forming that financial aid working group. And we looked at just all different types of things in our state with how it would apply to completing the FAFSA, what the completion rates would look like. And then we did know that our numbers were quite low And so we knew that we had to kind of start there. And like I said, we grabbed all kind of folks at the table. We had LASFA, of course, they were there. We had the Department of Revenue, the Department of Justice, Juvenile Justice as well, superintendents, teachers associations, counselors associations, anybody, community partners, anybody that we knew that had a stake in this, helping our students to advance, anybody in the K through 12 sector, all of those folks, we had someone at the table to kind of help us figure what it is we were looking for, what they can help and bring to the table. We looked at that. So we came in and we put our working group together, which meets quarterly, and we analyzed the current trends, best practices in financial aid planning, and created a network of resources for our students around the state. So a lot of times we also have added those folks who actually complete FAFSAs around the state. So we do have some community partners that work with that, assisting students in schools just like myself. LASFA is always there helping hand, and we all meet that group kind of meets on a little bit more of a regular basis to kind of talk about what it is that we need to do, especially with all of the changes that are coming about with the new FAFSA application. We're trying to make sure that we are definitely on board, making sure we're getting that correct information out there, because we do understand that a lot of times that information that families are receiving may not necessarily be correct. So we try to stay on the forefront of making sure that that information is correct and getting that out there. If you could advance to the next slide for me, please. So our task was, we started developing a state action plan to track schools, putting that information with who was completing the FAFSA application, making recommendations to the department regarding changes to the policy, just actually looking at a lot of different ways that we can also support the department in ongoing identification of services available to students and families. Like I said, we came up with me going out to schools, doing senior nights, giving them ideas of how they can get more families and students involved in completing this application, assisting the development with partnerships and alliances with financial aid. We also grabbed some folks at the higher ed level in the financial aid offices. We talked to them and had them also be on board. In places that we can't reach, we always refer our counselors to try to get with those financial aid counselors at the feeder schools, as I call it, any college or university that's in your area that we know a lot of our students were going to funnel into. So we try to work with them and say, hey, get some folks from their admissions office and financial aid office to come out to your senior nights. When families and students can see that, they know that if they are going to that particular school, they can have someone there that can help them and kind of give that one-on-one information to the students and families to talk to them about, just talking, getting that they have that familiar face that they can see that will definitely help them. And so if you advance to the next slide for me. So then we came up with our policy. So in December of 2015, the Board of Education, which was our BESE board, the Board of Education and Secondary Education, we approved a policy regarding our post-secondary planning for graduation for graduating public high school seniors. So the policy kind of sought to increase our student access to state and federal aid by requiring our seniors to complete one of the following. So they have to either complete the TOPS application, which is our state application for students to receive our state grant. And Ms. Ebony is going to discuss that a little bit more. They also can complete the FAFSA. If they having an issue where they're not able to complete the FAFSA or the TOPS application, and it is creating a hardship, a student can complete a hardship waiver, or a parent can say simply, I just don't want this process, which I don't want to complete it at all, and I don't want to do either of the first three options, and I just want to totally opt out, and it will not stop my student from graduating. So they can complete a parent opt-out form. Now, if you have a student or a family that completes the parent opt-out form or the hardship waiver, and then for whatever reason later on down the line within the school year, they complete either the TOPS application or the FAFSA, it does overlap. So even we've had that to happen with parents in the beginning saying that I don't want to do the parent, I don't want to do the FAFSA, FAFSA. My student is not going to college. They're not going to do anything. So we're going to do the parent opt-out form. But many times what we're finding is a lot of times students will, after graduation, things arise. Maybe they've had some light bulb moment, or they've talked to a couple of friends or family. Now folks are moving away, going to college, and they're saying, okay, I need to do something different. And then they come back and they complete the FAFSA application. So that information does come back and overlap. The policies were made into effect starting our 2017-2018 school year, and those students had to complete the application for that next school year. So if they started in 2018, they would have to complete the 18-19 applications, what they did. So the following year, so when after they graduated May, whatever the application is for that fall, then they would complete that one. And generally that's the one that opens in October. So our students this year will be completing the 23-24 application. I'm sorry, the 24-25 application. And so this year, of course, you know that it won't open until December instead of our traditional time in October. And can you advance? Yes, thank you. So every year we do the state of financial aid in Louisiana, and it is a document, an annual report where we actually look over the trends of what's going on in our state from the previous year. So we look at is generally telling us what's going on. We're looking at national trends as opposed to what's going on in our state as well. As you know, with COVID, a lot of our stuff went down because, of course, it went down across the nation with folks not deciding that they were not able to go to college at this moment, but we were finding that students still were completing the application, but not as much as before. But we're noticing that our numbers are definitely still going back up. This year, we were still at number 1. I think last year we ended up at number 2, but this year we're back up to number 1 with our students. So as we slowly trend out of, I don't want to say COVID because it doesn't seem like it'll go away. We're still going to continue to have that. I think we're now finding other ways that we can better assist our students living in the time of, I don't want to say post-COVID because it's still here. Just figuring out ways of how we can help students and families, you know, maneuver through that. And like I said, every year we do a report which talks about all kind of things. We detail FAFSA summaries, submission rates by school. We do it as well as by our parishes, and we do subgroups as well. So we kind of look at all the trends. You know, if this particular group is completing more, we maybe have more females completing the application as opposed to males. We look at all of those trends and we put that information inside our annual report. As well as there was a recommendation for them to hire one full-time person, and we have a part-time counselor that also helps with completing the FAFSA applications as well. She's my person who actually reaches out to my schools. She's actually a retired counselor, so she is very knowledgeable of that day-to-day what happens at a school. So she can definitely, you know, coach our counselors on what things that they may need and to complete this process. And we just let them know that, hey, you don't have to do this all on your own. We have several resources. We can come in ourselves to help you. And we just come with all kind of ideas that, you know, maybe somebody didn't think of how they can better combat this. And it doesn't necessarily have to fall on the counselors, but we always tell them just as long as someone at the school. We've had in situations where there were folks at the, there was a retired secretary. She had been at the school for many, many years, and they actually had her doing FAFSA completion because, of course, she knew everyone there. Most of the students that came through there, she either had taught them or worked with them over the years. So she was very familiar with them, and that was a very successful thing that particular school decided to do. So we always discuss different ways that we can help them figure this out. And they just come up with all kind of ideas, things that I necessarily didn't think of. If you want to advance to the next slide, and I think this is my information. If you guys want to reach out to me, your best bet is to always send me an email, of course, at either one of the two options. And, you know, since I'm always on the road, you can definitely, I respond very quickly to emails, and you can turn it over to Miss Ebony.
Thank you. So introductions have already been made, so we can go ahead and jump right into it.
And so as Barry said, of course, October 2020, when the FAFSA was released, of course, we were still kind of mid-COVID. And so what we did is that we basically went back to our FAFSA Now campaign, which we actually launched in 2020. And so that was to kind of get a jump start on helping our students get their FAFSA completed. And of course, we had some challenges there because, of course, we were virtual. We do a lot of outreach, but we were able to thankfully translate that into a lot of virtual outreach and make sure we were still able to meet the needs of our students and our families. And what FAFSA Now was about is basically encouraging them to get that FAFSA in. For graduation requirements, we require them to submit the FAFSA. However, with FAFSA Now, we are urging for completion because, as Barry referenced, our state scholarship, which is the top scholarship, requires completion in order for them to be able to be found eligible for the award. And then they also need to have it completed if they are going to be eligible for any financial aid that following semester. So we used a number of tactics to promote this FAFSA Now campaign: text messaging, social media outlets, putting word out to our counselors and asking them and our post-secondary institutions to facilitate or disseminate the information as well. And then we also had a press kit that we developed with graphics, flyers, and other things, including scrolling marquee signs for the post-secondary institutions to share with the students on their campus, because we were pushing completion not only for our high school students, but we also want to make sure that our students that are currently enrolled in college, we want to make sure that they're renewing their FAFSAs as well. And we can move to the next slide. So we have a number of outreach efforts. Like Barry, we normally hit the ground running actually now in August as they're returning to school. Our outreach is starting to ramp up. With the layout or the rollout of the Better FAFSA, that is actually going to impact our outreach schedule. Usually October, we're doing college application month events and we're doing FAFSA completion events. What we're doing now, in the past October, we've done FAFSA completion events. We anticipate that is going to shift later in the year whenever the FAFSA is released, which is expected to be in December. However, we also do FAFSA completion. In addition to FAFSA completion, we do FSAID workshops as well. So we will be doing a lot of those, I anticipate, as we get ready for the FAFSA to roll out. But we do FAFSA completion events. And so we'll be geared up to do those whenever the FAFSA is released. We are currently working on developing professional development training for our counselors, so they will be ready to assist as well with those FAFSA completion events. We have a lab here in our office. So for those individuals that are local, we are located in Baton Rouge. For those individuals that are close to us, they can drop in and we will help them complete their FAFSA. We have virtual office hours, which are done through Zoom, so we can do one-on-one assistance with them to help them get the FAFSA completed, or if they've started and it's like, hey, it's incomplete, we can help them try to work around that so they can move from submission to completion. We also have an email address that is dedicated to FAFSA completions, and so or any other FAFSA related questions, and that's the gofafsa@la.gov. They can text us to sign up to receive text messages and nudges from us. And then what we also do is that based on all of the FAFSAs that we get in, we actually go back and we look at those FAFSAs that are incomplete and we look at why they're incomplete. Vast majority of them are going to be missing signatures. And so what we do is we have customized email templates where we reach out to those individuals and tell them, hey, you're missing a signature. Or, hey, it appears something is wrong with your social. You need to go back and revisit your FAFSA. So we are kind of looking at individually what those problems are and sending that specialized email to those students, telling them exactly how they need to resolve that particular error. Usually over the summer, we'll do a virtual FAFSA marathon just kind of as an extra push. Our priority deadline is February 1st, but if, graduation isn't until May. And so generally what we'll do is that we'll kind of do that virtual FAFSA marathon where we open up our virtual office hours outside of our normal office hours, and we run into those evening hours so that we're a little bit more accessible. And so if they have not completed that FAFSA at this point, this is an opportunity for them to do so. We also have partnerships with a lot of other organizations in the community, other college access organizations, post-secondary institutions. We work very closely with our counselors, as Barry mentioned, because it's a very heavy lift. And so in order for us to have a successful outreach strategy for FAFSA completion, it's going to take, efforts from our agency. We're a state agency. It's going to take efforts from our post-secondary institutions and our high schools as well. Next. And so we also have the FAFSA completion project. And so this is also a tool that kind of helps the schools identify which of their students have not yet completed the FAFSA. So this was actually a federal initiative that was meant to encourage our high school seniors to complete the FAFSA, but it also gives those schools and the counselors the ability to see which students have not yet completed their FAFSA, or if they have completed the FAFSA, if they have an error. And so they don't have as comprehensive of a look that we have, but they do have access to that student level data as long as their district has basically signed a memorandum of understanding with us to receive that data. And so basically they will know, the counselors will know, hey, I have 100 seniors, these 10 have not completed their FAFSA. So that allows them to identify those students, seek them out, and either assist them with completion, or if they need to call us in or refer the student to us or someone at another college access agency to assist with completion, they can do that. Next. And so we also have our Complete to Compete portal, which is currently undergoing a facelift. And so this is a statewide tracker. Before we had the mandate, we received a FAFSA completion grant that we used, to try to, it was for East Baton Rouge. And so we were able to use this tracker to basically bolster some friendly competition between the schools in that district or in our district, so they could kind of see where their schools fell at within EBR and FAFSA completion rates. And of course, with the grant, the schools that had the highest FAFSA completion rate each month, we were able to do something special for. We did like pizza parties. And so even after the grant was done, we continued to use the Complete to Compete portal so that schools could kind of see where they rank at, and just, encourage some friendly competition amongst our districts and our high schools. Next. And then we also did a virtual FAFSA ceremony. Of course, this was at the height of COVID, but we still wanted a way to recognize our schools of excellence. And so those were our schools that reach 100% completion. So not even just submission, but 100% completion. And then also we had our schools of achievement, which exceeded the national completion average. And we just wanted to take a moment to celebrate those schools. They were invited to our advisory board meeting where, and all of those schools received certificates from us. But we also did that. We recognized our monthly FAFSA champions. And then we also, whenever we get the opportunity, like to highlight our student and counselor voices, because we know that this is a task that is not just LOSFA or Department of Education, but it's shared by our counselors and post-secondary institutions. And here is my contact information. Like Barry, it is going to be best to reach me by email. Sometimes I'm out on the road, but usually I just have like 6 million meetings every day. But certainly if you want to reach out, there's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry and Ebony. That was very interesting to listen to. We already have a couple of questions for you all for the end, and I know I have a couple of my own, so we'll get back to you all. All right. And now I will turn it over to Sandra Scott and Manisha Mishra, both from Alabama Possible. Their advocacy efforts on a universal FAFSA policy went from having them ranked from the low end of completion. Now they're typically in the top, they've been in the top 10 for completion since adopting their policy for 2 years in a row. So I will turn it over to you two.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Manisha Mishra, the Deputy Director at Alabama Possible, and I'm joined by our Executive Director, Chandra Scott. So Alabama Possible is a statewide nonprofit organization in Alabama who for 30 years, this is our 30th year, has transformed the discussions around poverty and education around the state. Next slide, please. Our mission is to break down the barriers to prosperity statewide, and there are 3 ways we do that: through advocacy, education, and collaboration. Next slide, please. So we would not be able to do the work that we do without our sponsors. So we make sure that we thank our sponsors at every presentation and let them know that we are grateful for their funding of our initiatives. Next slide. And we have our partners: Alabama Commission on Higher Education, Alabama Community College Systems, Alabama State Department of Education, as well as Get Educated Edu Inc. Through them, we actually, that helps assist our students to access common Black college applications for free. Next slide, please. So each and every initiative at Alabama Possible is connected to the 4 areas mentioned here, and that's post-secondary access, post-secondary success, advocacy, and civic engagement. Next. Here are some of our initiatives like Alabama Goes to College, Degrees When Due, Alabama College Attainment Network, and then we have our Higher Education Alliance. Next slide, please. So post-secondary access work is centered around the Alabama Goes to College campaign. This is a 3-component campaign, as you can see, and includes Cash for College, which is FAFSA completion. It includes Alabama College Application Week, and it also includes College and Career Decision Day. So like I mentioned, it's a 3-component campaign that improves post-secondary access and success for students. And we do that by equipping educators, that's counselors and career coaches at high schools, and community leaders to assist students navigate their journey to and through a post-secondary pathway. Next slide, please. Alabama Possible also serves as a backbone agency for the Alabama College Attainment Network, which is a multi-sector network that creates solutions to support statewide, regional, local post-secondary attainment goals, leading to talent development. So we also have Higher Education Alliance, which we have about 22 2- and 4-year colleges as part of this alliance. So in collaboration with Alabama Commission on of Higher Education, we advocated for SB 175 to be included in the state budget, which is part of our Re-Engage Alabama. So our Re-Engage Alabama initiative is to ensure that adults with some college and no degree get back to college and complete their education, whether it's an associate's degree, an undergrad degree, just get back to college and complete. So this bill, what it does, it ensures that adults with some college and no degree, they can come back to complete their education and will be awarded scholarships of $3,000 each semester if they want to go to a 4-year college, and $1,500 if they want to go to 2-year colleges to complete their degree. We are also the first ever conveners in the nation of the Alabama Historically Black and Predominantly Black Community Colleges, ensuring that they have all the necessary tools they need towards student success. Next slide, please. So this is a civic engagement slide. So we, every year for 13 years now, Alabama Possible has been producing and distributing a Barriers to Prosperity data sheet. So the data sheet highlights poverty rates, educational attainment statistics, employment rates, food security, median household income data, and many other valuable pieces of information for all 67 counties in Alabama. The Barriers to Prosperity Toolkit guides communities from deliberation to action by convening citizens throughout the state to explore the community's barriers to prosperity and coalesce around shared data-informed plan of action. Now I will invite our Executive Director, Chandra Scott, to take you through our process of advocacy. Chandra, all yours.
Thanks, Manisha. And I'm sorry I have to stay off camera. My internet seems to be a little unstable today for some reason, so I'm hoping I sound okay. Hoping I'm not sounding like a robot right now. But real quick, so our advocacy, as Manisha touched on some of it, it's pretty vast. It's not just around FAFSA, but also looking at how to remove barriers to financial access to be able to continue a post-secondary pathway. So it also included making sure we did not forget, the population of those who have some college no degree. But I do want to dive in for this today webinar, dive into what our FAFSA advocacy efforts look like. So for us, it started with a strategy first and understanding what this was going to take. This was going to be a huge undertaking, which we very much knew in our state. We are obviously in a red state. And so we knew there were going to be challenges in getting this over the finish line. And so we knew first we need to make sure we incorporated student voices. This was to benefit them. So you have to have the benefactors a part of the campaign. How are we going to reach the masses? We knew social media was going to have to be one of the main outlets that we really utilize as a way to get out information as to what this was and why this was. And of course, using traditional media outlets, op-eds could be your best friend when you're doing an advocacy strategy campaign, because it really allows you to bring in voices from various individuals that you partner with to share their why they feel like this campaign or advocacy strategy is important. Of course, we hosted a webpage where we were able to get people to go to and submit a letter to their state board of education. So our state did a little different. Instead of it going through legislation, it went through our state board of education for the vote. Next slide. So we started with understanding where we were as a state, not only just around FAFSA, but also FAFSA in the midst of COVID. And when we began to look at the data, we noticed by June, the class of 2020 had already gone 3% lower than the class of 2019. So this was a huge, huge red flag for us that we were going in the wrong direction. Our FAFSA completion rate was not already great. You go to the next slide, but we knew now we had a better understanding of why this was going to matter to take on advocating for a universal FAFSA policy. And I had to thank Louisiana, who just presented. We did a lot of R&D from you guys, really understanding how you did it and understanding what we needed to do. So next slide. We were able to define why it mattered for Alabama. Our state already had a post-secondary attainment goal that by 2025, we need 500,000 highly skilled Alabamians to fulfill the workforce. But which is about 60% if you look at it percentage-wise. And we were sitting at 45%. And then we're seeing FAFSA completion rates go down. So we were like, okay, 1 + 1 and this is not equaling 2. And so we realized we really got to figure out what the strategy is and how to move forward. Next slide. And then, of course, thanks to NCAN, we were able to see where we ranked as a state. And this is not a ranking that no one wants to see, right? For your state, we were 32nd in completion for FAFSA. And, unfortunately, we were holding this type of ranking for a very long time. And so we knew to get out of this ranking status, there was going to have to be a huge mix-up. And so that's why we felt like the policy, for us, it was not about compliance, which a lot of people like to use policy change for compliance. For us, it was really more so about changing the conversation in our state. Next slide. We were noticing that out of that 32nd ranking, 2 of the 5 seniors in our state had the financial means to go into college. They were completing their FAFSA and gaining access to $2 to continue their post-secondary journey. Well, that means that there are a lot of families in our state who are not having that conversation. And so for us, this was what the FAFSA completion strategy was really about. Next slide. So here is what that timeline looked like. And before I begin, I would say this should not be your timeline. It should not follow this strategy. This was a very compact strategy because we had to move very fast. In October, we began to put together the plan, began to strategize what that looked like, engaging students, workforce leaders, educators across the state, and advocating for this policy. In April of 2021, the policy passed a 6-3 vote for our Board of Education. Of course, then that meant we had to go out and start dispelling a lot of myths about what this policy meant, because the first thing people, oh, my child's not going to graduate, or they're looking for ways to make graduation harder. They're saying everyone has to go to college in Alabama. So we had to go and dispel all those myths, on top of making sure that our front line, which we see as counselors and career coaches, were heavily supported and trained and had the resources they need to be able to now go from maybe only seeing 10% of the graduating class to now 100% of their graduating class in their office to completing the FAFSA. And then, of course, August hit and the policy began to roll into implementation. Next slide. So that meant our office had to really figure out, how do we make the counselors feel supported? Because they're the ones on the front line of this work. So we actually packed overnight bags and did a road trip over the state. We went from the bottom of the state to the top of the community college system, and we were able to host FAFSA in-person workshops. We knew, even though we were still battling with COVID and the pandemic, we knew this was something we could not do virtual. We had to go in space with them to help them understand they are being supported throughout this process. And so we were able to meet with all counselors and career coaches across our state and able to show them the support. Next slide. And of course, not on them support, but bringing with us resources that they can utilize when they go back to their school buildings. And the beauty of it, having it hosted at the community college system, we were able to have post-secondary financial aid advisors in this space as well, so they can understand the implications of what this policy will have on them, how the number of uptick of applications and how that's going to affect their offices. So we knew this was a domino effect, not only just for the K-12 system, but also higher ed. And so having them together to work out what their strategy was going to be for implementation on the ground was very important. And having these resources from either handbooks for educators, guidebooks for students and families, as well as creating our first ever educator advisory council. So we were able to get a counselor and or a career coach. Our state is divided into 7 workforce regions. So we were able to get one person from this council to really keep us engaged and informed of what's happening in the school buildings, so we can make sure as a team that we adjusted our trainings and our resources to meet their needs. Going to happen that questions were going to arise when we weren't in the space, and we want to make sure people had an outlet to reach out to. And so we were able to provide them what we call our Alabama Goes to College help desk, with either through phone or text, where they're able, and also through social media, able to reach out to our office to get that specialized support. And also we made sure that educators had what we call a peer-to-peer support group area. So they have a private Facebook page just for educators and career coaches and counselors, where they can come together and really talk and share ideas and support one another. We made sure we had FAFSA office hours and support, so counselors can just call in when we had these office hours, and they can come ask for questions and guidance that they need, their challenges that are arising with different cases for FAFSA completion of their families. We made sure that we equipped our counselors and career coaches with a social media toolkit. And so we will post, but they will also have a toolkit in which they can utilize graphics and messaging to get out to their students in their community. Next slide. But I would say, if you're building out a strategy campaign to create a universal FAFSA policy in your state, make sure you have a way to report progress. Do not leave your counselors in the dark where they do not understand the work that they're doing and the impact that it's having. So Alabama Possible, we offer what we call a district level and school level dashboard. So at least they can see from previous year to the current year, any improvements they're making or where they're lacking. And so they can know, and best of all, they can look at their competitor schools, which we all know high schools love friendly competition. They can see how their peer high schools are doing. And if they want to have friendly competitions amongst themselves, they're welcome to, because they can see the data. Next slide. But of course, for the counselors, we partner with our Alabama Commission of Higher Ed and providing a student level dashboard. So now the counselors have access to see in their building which student has completed, which student needs to go through verification, which student is missing. All of those details are available to them in this particular data tool. So now they can be more direct in their communication with the students and how and who they should be communicating with to get the students across the finish line. Next slide, I'm sorry. But of course, in all of that, I will always tell you to pause and celebrate your educators throughout the process. They really undertake a lot of this heavy lifting. And so one way that our office does that is we provide them what we call a Cash for College celebration day. And so this is a virtual event that we host in which we celebrate counselors across our state in which schools are in our MVP or most improved. So MVP is obviously the high completion rates, and our MVP, those who have most improved, but those who we've seen a most improvement rate and from year to year of their FAFSA completion. And so we celebrate both of those because maybe they didn't hit the mark of having a high completion rate, but the fact that they're moving the needle and having a most improvement from year to year shows us that they're moving in the right direction. And we celebrate that. And in that celebration, we're able to provide grants to these high schools so they can utilize in the next school year to continue to build their culture of college going in their school building. And so we are very excited to be able to provide that for them. Next slide. So in all of that work in our first year of providing the universal FAFSA policy, Alabama ranked 10th in the nation in our first year. And we were very, very excited to go from 32nd to 10th. That is a huge jump for us, especially in the first year when there were so many questions, so many doubts. As you saw in our timeline, we didn't have a year of planning and pulling together a team to really strategize. We only had 4 months. And so to be able to see this type of reaction and result from that very little planning to right into implementation really speaks volumes to what the counselors and career coaches did and the resources able to provide them. Next slide. And not only did we rank 10th, but we also ranked 2nd in the nation for year over year, obviously, because we did such a huge jump from 32nd to 10th that put us in ranking of 2nd for year over year completion. I do want to add one note around looking at using this data for understanding not only what happened in the high schools, but what happened after high school. And so I'll be able to share in just a moment what that looked like for our college enrollment. Next slide. So, but what I do want to say, your strategy does not stop after your first year. And honestly, that's when it kicks in the most in high gear, because now you need to go and evaluate the progress that you made, understanding what were the pitfalls, understanding what were some of the challenges that students, families, as well as the educators face, so you can be able to fine tune what the action looks like for the next school year. So that was the work that we did after the first year of the policy. And one thing that we noticed is that because there was a huge pain point on student to advisement ratio, because now of the policy by counselors, and we have high schools with graduating classes, sometimes 600, 700, 800 students, and there was only one high school senior counselor. Well, that is not a recipe for a good outcome. And so we had to address that by meeting with our state superintendent, presenting that data to him about what's happening with the policy. Yes, we've ranked 10th in the nation, but we're seeing pain points that can really impact us in the next year. And so we were able to meet with him and get him to put more dollars into hiring additional career coaches across our state to address those needs. And then also the data tool had to evolve, because our FAFSA universal policy also, just like Louisiana, provides the opt-out waiver. We needed to understand how those opt-out waivers are being utilized. Is it at the district level? Is it at the parent level? Where are we seeing the upticks? Because that can inform us of what strategies we need to put in place to address that. Is it that parents are not understanding and just opting out because they don't have the understanding or the the resources of support to complete it. And so being able to evolve our dashboard in partnership with the Commission of Higher Ed really help us to really look more deeper at that data and understanding where those opt-out waivers were coming from. So again, your first year before your policy, your strategy does not end. It really kicks in your second year. Next slide, please. And currently, this is where Alabama is sitting as far as in our second year of this policy being in place. We've gone down 1 point in ranking. We're in the 11th, but we're still very proud of that ranking just because there are so many challenges that still faced in the midst of completing FAFSA and just still lots of misunderstandings we're still battling up against. But of course, that puts us at 44th. For year over year, because it's, once you make that big leap, it's hard to make a big leap again, right? So your year over year ranking is not as high. So what we've also learned, next slide, through this process, and one thing I'll add here around looking at your data beyond K-12, we're now seeing in our community college system is where we wanted to really understand, are we seeing an uptick there? And we have noticed there was about a 21% increase in applications of students applying, and then there was a 5% increase in enrollment across our state for two-year institutions. We still haven't gotten the four-year data yet, but that was really a great glimpse at how the FAFSA is playing a role in an uptick in enrollment at our two-year colleges, because as you know, if a student is able to qualify for the max Pell in Alabama, that's pretty much considered free two-year college in our state. And so we're very excited to see that correlation beginning to happen in Alabama. Next slide. Just real quick, I'll recap some of the things that we've learned that are important in this process. Setting the goals and understanding your why. For us, we had to really fight compliance when it was not. This was really about changing the narrative for our households in our state and removing those barriers to prosperity. Build and leverage strong partnerships that you already have and get them to join the team as your allies and really get important for this policy to really be in place in your state. And one thing we know, workforce is the best language you can use as your why with your partners. And again, helping your college, those on the front line, to incorporate into their curriculum. Any college going the educators with, we have a very similar timeline we provide for high school students, along with the guidebook, which activities they can do in the classroom. Next slide. And then, of course, really family and parent engagement is a huge one for counselors, because they only have so many resources. So help them build their team of partners to really engage parents, partnering with the community college system, partnering with your four-year institutions, partnering with other nonprofits that provide post-secondary access supports to be able to really support the parent and family engagement across your state, because we know for a fact that is one of the major challenges, especially if you have language barriers with families, if you have income barriers and just misunderstandings around the FAFSA, all of those things you want to be able to get across by just partnering with various institutions or agencies to really engage your families. And of course, there's multiple modes out there, so utilize all of them to the fullest. And again, the last but not least of all, track the data and celebrate the success. And you have to share the data publicly. That's the best way to work against any of those barriers and challenges that people may put forward. So hopefully that was very helpful, and you begin to think about what the policy looks like in your state, and this is the best way to connect with Alabama possible. All right,
Thank you to you both for presenting on Alabama. I appreciate it. And then we will now turn it over to Greg Harrell, Director of Legislation at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. So Indiana is one of the latest states to pass universal FAFSA policy, and it's going to be implemented with this current school year. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, Deborah, again, thank you so much for having me, and pleasure to hear the good work that's going on in Louisiana and Alabama apropos of FAFSA. So I think there are some parts of my presentation, some overarching parallels between the presentations before me, and since we're a little short on time, I'll kind of skip through those portions and focus on the other parts. So at the Commission for Higher Education, we are a state entity that provides state financial aid to the students of Indiana, and we are a coordinating body for higher education in the state. So unfortunately, with regards to a universal FAFSA policy, that's not something that we have the statutory authority to create ourselves. But we were able to seek support from our General Assembly, and we're able to get our policy passed through legislation this most recent session, which concluded in April. And so just in the few slides that I have, want to talk about where we were, and now with this change in place, the direction in which we're going. So we have a great outreach team who works across all 92 counties in the state. However, there are still many Hoosier students each year who do not file the FAFSA, and that's something that we're really trying to tackle. We're concerned with our state's future prosperity and having the workforce of today and the future that our employers demand. And in order to do so, we need everyone to be successful here in the state of Indiana, and we think that the FAFSA is a key ingredient to that. So just with our class of 2022, there was about $70 million that was left on the table simply by our students not filing the FAFSA for that graduating class. And similar to the statistic shared by our colleagues at Alabama, we were 40th in the country for 2022, and obviously something that we are really looking to improve here in the state. So, our FAFSA percentages since the initial start of the pandemic have rebounded slightly, but we're still below those pre-pandemic levels. And we know that students, at schools with higher free and reduced lunch populations, rural schools, and schools that traditionally enroll larger students of color have been disproportionately impacted by the decline in FAFSA filing. And we also know that this mirrors many of the declines that we're seeing in our college-going rate in Indiana. So we were at a high point just about 5 years ago at 65% of our students, and we've dropped pretty precipitously in the past 5 years and are now down to 53%. So we're really trying to tackle that, and we think that the FAFSA, is a key way by which to do that. So the call to action, obviously, if we're not addressing this issue, it's going to have it already arguably is generating issues for our economy, but there will be long-term consequences that we'll experience in Indiana. And so we have now for about 5 years strongly supported legislation aimed at making FAFSA a default option for Indiana students. Next slide, please. And prior to this last session, bills on this topic were authored and would pass the House, but then fail in the Senate, or pass the Senate and then fail in the House. So we just weren't ever able to get consensus on that original language. And so we did make some incremental progress actually 2 years ago in 2022 with the passage of Senate Enrolled Act 82, which was originally in its scope designed to make FAFSA a default option, but we ran into some pretty strong opposition from some of our associations, notably the Principals Association, and they just had some concerns about the increased workload to school counselors especially, but others involved in supporting FAFSA completion in the schools. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to reach consensus on that language when the bill got over to the House and second chamber. So most of that language in the bill was stricken, but we were able to land on language that established something called the FAFSA affirmation form, which I'll detail in the next slide. Simply put, it required us at the Commission for Higher Education to build a tool by which our schools could share to students and their parents so that they could electronically submit requests for support with the FAFSA from the Commission for Higher Education. And so that was definitely helpful. We had a lot of students reach out and they were able to get either one-on-one support virtually or in person from our outreach team. So, that was a small win for us, but we came into the last 2023 legislative session really hoping to, turn the page and ultimately get this legislation passed. So share about that in the next slide. The Senate bill was 167, and it does make filing the FAFSA a default option for high school seniors, beginning with the class of 2024. So starting this year, and we've been very intentional about the way in which we're calling that being default option rather than requirement, because there are opt-out provisions, as some of our other colleagues on the call have detailed with their strategies. We have opt-out provisions for those who do not want to file. And so there are two ways in which that can happen. One, if parents or if students are emancipated, do not want to file, they can opt out. And secondly, because of the increased work and partnership from our schools and counselors, if a high school has made at least 2 reasonable attempts to contact the student and parent and try to get them to file and they still have not, we are building an automated way by which they can batch waive those students in our statewide system for financial aid in Indiana. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. So we're still pretty early in implementation efforts, mainly just because the FAFSA is opening, a little bit later this year in lieu of October. So what we're doing so far is one, for parents or students, we're building an opt-out form by which families can opt out for the 24-25 FAFSA, and we'll have that available as the FAFSA launches in December. Secondly, for the batch, opt-out for our schools, we are building a widget in ScholarTrack, which is our statewide system for financial aid. That will be made available to our schools to produce those uploads if they choose after April 15th. And the reason that we selected that date is because that is the priority deadline for state financial aid here in Indiana. And so those will be the two components of implementation efforts for this legislation. Next slide, please. And so, we did a lot of research and duplicate with, the work being produced out of Alabama and Louisiana and Texas and others. And, we think that these results are going to help reverse the troubling trends that we have experienced in Indiana. Just to cite Alabama again, rising from 34th to, I believe it was 9th or 10th in the nation, and similar in Texas upon implementation of their strategy, rising from 23rd to 5th. Deborah, we're really eager to, boost our numbers above what they've been in the past, referencing back to that 40th in the country. And we're really eager to begin this work. But I would just maybe end on, we tried this for, 4 or 5 years and we're unsuccessful for the first, few times we tried this, but we were persistent. Because we know that this is going to make a difference for our state and most importantly, the lives of our students and families in Indiana. And so with that, I think we're at time. So I'll, Deborah, turn it back over to you and my contact information. If anybody would like to chat later on, I'm happy to discuss, what our strategy is in Indiana and how, a deeper level of where we're going.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you to the rest of our panelists. Yes, we are at time, so I apologize that we won't be able to get to questions, though I know some of them were answered in the chat. But we will make sure that all the slides from today's webinar and the recording will be available to you all within a week. And so we'll also make sure that we include the contact information for all of our panelists there if you have any questions that you wanted to ask that you didn't get a chance to. So thank you again, everyone, for participating. And one last thank you to all of our panelists. Have a great day. Thank you.